Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. In today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about the full moon in Aquarius coming up at the end of July. So this full moon will be at 6 degrees Aquarius. It is on Wednesday, the 29th of July. Unless you're in Australia, then it will be Thursday, the 30th. It is a full moon, so it deserves our attention, but it's not a typical full moon. It is a full moon conjunct Pluto while being opposite to Jupiter. So it is a full moon that packs a much bigger punch than usual. So this full moon, because it lights up Jupiter and Leo opposite Pluto in Aquarius, it is going to be an especially intense and kind of drama-filled full moon. So I want to get into a number of themes and topics that this full moon is highlighting or bringing forward. So that is going to be the focus of today's show. Before I dive into that, I want to take a minute and let you know about my astrology group mentoring for 2026. This is the perfect container for you if you are a senior student finishing your studies with myself or another astrology teacher, or if you're a new practitioner looking to build and grow your own astrology practice. So in group mentoring, we're going to have 6 live sessions together starting in August and running through until the end of the year. You will get all kinds of tips and support on how to set up your astrology practice, how to price and promote your services, all kind of business tips that you need to know to create the most successful and the most impactful, the most helpful astrology practice. We also take time in group mentoring to improve our chart interpretation and predictive astrology skills. So if you have already learned a bunch of techniques and you want a bit of a chance to practice them and maybe get feedback on how to make your chart skills even better, group mentoring is for you. We do start in August. Pop over to kellysastrology.com to find out all the details or to sign up today. The important piece of info you need to know is that the early bird price ends on July 31st. So if you're interested in group mentoring, sign up before the end of July so that you get the best rate. And I look forward to spending some time with you in that small group container starting in August. All right, team, with that message shared, let us get into everything we're going to talk about today. Full moon in Aquarius, conjunct Pluto. Hopefully we'll talk about it being ruled by Saturn in Aries and Jupiter. So we need to talk about all the things. Okay, so let's run through a few things first. The full moon is in an air sign. So before we get too technical and too complicated, this is a full moon that emphasizes the mind, the intellect, thoughts, and communication. So we might expect that mentally the energy is very busy or very buzzy. Your mind might be full of ideas and possibilities. Now, because the moon is really tightly conjunct Pluto, it's only 2 degrees away from Pluto, it might be that you're like obsessed. You've got this mental obsession energy. Maybe there is a mystery or a conundrum that you are just digging into. Maybe there's a situation that is puzzling you because you're like, this doesn't make sense. There's something going on here that I don't know yet. And you're kind of going to go digging for the facts or the information. You're going on a bit of an investigation, if you like. So with the full moon conjunct Pluto, we do get a bit of an obsessive or a compulsive, this like, I can't let this thing go until I have, uncovered more of the truth or more of what's been hidden about what's been going on. And that is kind of a summary for this full moon, but we're going to break it down a lot more. The symbolism of this full moon is really interesting. The moon is at her biggest and brightest, of course, because that is the moment of the full moon. But she is aligned with Pluto, a planet of shadows and depth and what kind of sits in darkness. And so it really feels like this full moon is going to shine a spotlight on something that's been hidden. Maybe it's about a full moon that brings a secret into light. You know, when you You just imagine your wardrobe or closet at home. This is an area of our homes typically, or maybe there's a storage closet in your workspace. We quickly open the door and we stuff stuff in there. We just throw things in there and we close the door. We kind of leave it in the darkness. And then at a full moon conjunct Pluto moment like this, it's almost like the doors are open. We've got some spotlights or floodlights, and we're actually checking out what is in the nooks and crannies. What have we been ignoring? What did we forget that was even there? So that's kind of the symbolism of what's going on here. The idea of a bright light being shone onto an area that has been in the darkness. Now, it may be that something is just sitting right there and you haven't looked at it, but it may be that something has been intentionally obscured or kept hidden, and now it comes to light. And so that's where we get that idea of this full moon, the bright light of the moon being conjunct the shadows and mysterious nature of Pluto. That's where we get that idea of a shocking revelation or something like a secret coming to light. So the light of the full moon comes into the shadowy, secretive, hidden zone of Pluto, and something we didn't know is kind of revealed or becomes known. Now, at the time of this full moon, it's on the same day as the Sun and Jupiter form their conjunction, technically the cazimi. And that's a story for another moment, really. I've covered that inside my membership if you want more on that. So if we just stay with our factors influencing the full moon, what is notable here is that as the moon becomes her biggest and brightest, her most impactful, her most potent moment of illumination, which is what the full moon is, not only is she conjunct Pluto, but she's also tightly opposite Jupiter. So we know that Jupiter's effects are in this full moon as well. And Jupiter makes things bigger. Jupiter expands, emphasizes, and amplifies, which means that if you get a flood of feeling under the full moon, they are big feelings. They are dramatic feelings. They might be overwhelming feelings. If you have some bright ideas, or if you're dealing with this kind of revelation or secret coming to light quality, it's big. It's not a small thing that you just kind of digest quickly and move on from. The revelation, the mental energy is taken to the nth degree. And that's because Jupiter is right tight with the sun. And so the moon is influenced by Jupiter at the moment of the full moon. So it's big, it's impactful. And essentially what this means is that your feelings kind of become so big that you can't ignore them. That's where we get insight about our true emotional nature under this full moon. It also means that the impact of events and experiences that happen around the 29th of July under this full moon are going to be far-reaching. They're not, that they kind of ripple out and affect other areas of our chart and lives as well. So we want to keep that in mind. So far we've just been kind of really dialing in to that full moon. It is conjunct Pluto and the influence of Jupiter in there as well. But there's another way we can think about this. We can think about the axis of the full moon as an illuminator or even an activator for that ongoing Jupiter opposite Pluto aspect itself. So we sort of have two oppositions coming into alignment at the moment of the peak for one of those oppositions, which is why this full moon, even though it's not an eclipse, it's going to have a much more powerful impact than a typical full moon. Now, that Jupiter in Leo opposition aspect to Pluto in Aquarius, technically that peaks around July 20th. So even as I'm recording this, we technically passed the peak of that. However, because the full moon comes in and activates Jupiter-Pluto, it extends the Jupiter-Pluto aspect from its technical peak by degree in a minute on the 20th of July, right through really until the tail end of the month. I would say until the moon leaves the sign of Aquarius, we're still kind of under the emanations of Jupiter opposite Pluto. So what is Jupiter opposite Pluto about? I've got a few thoughts, and some of you might have thoughts as well. So feel free to drop your thoughts about this aspect, which is definitely a collective aspect, in the comments below. So Jupiter opposite Pluto, it really feels like it is highlighting a struggle or bringing into the foreground an area of difference or disagreement. It's an opposition aspect. We know that we have some tension here and we have some discord. Now, when I think specifically about Jupiter opposite Pluto, I think about this sort of struggle or differences between those who have in excess and those who are experiencing lack. So some of these inequalities around wealth and about power, about agency, about the ability to kind of influence or even control your life and your destiny, that all feels part of Jupiter opposite Pluto. Because of Jupiter's connection to justice and kind of laws and integrity, I wonder about this Jupiter opposite Pluto aspect also highlighting what the rules and regulations and the laws are, but who is it that they actually apply to? Who is it that the rules and regulations don't apply to, and what's going on with that? So we're looking at all of these sort of maybe breakdowns of where some Jupiter things aren't working as well as they could be, and we're asking questions as to why. So because Jupiter does have that connection to justice and the law, but also to prosperity and wealth, and then because Jupiter is in this opposition aspect with Pluto, it's at odds with Pluto, it to me really suggests that there are some secretive or hidden factors that are really influencing what is going on with wealth and power, in the world and in society today. And so that brings up a lot of probing questions and discussions and themes that may not necessarily be fixed immediately under this full moon, under this full moon and under this Jupiter opposite Pluto aspect, but it feels like it's raising awareness for a matter that is going to have to be addressed because it's not going to go away on its own. So one particular collective conversation that I see parts of this Jupiter opposite Pluto aspect contributing to is the conversation about taxing the rich, the idea of this movement to increase taxes at the highest levels of wealth. And there's a particular part of this conversation which is talking about taxing assets, not just income, which is the way that, many of the current systems are set up. And part of the push to consider that as a change is that by taxing income or, wages, that disproportionately benefits those who have a lot of assets and may not technically show a lot of income. So there's a lot of nuance in here. Of course, with anything with Jupiter opposite Pluto, there's many layers. And I think Jupiter opposite Pluto is bringing to light not just matters about taxing the wealthy, but lots of collective topics and themes where there is discord and dissatisfaction. We could bring in Jupiter's link to education and what is the conversations that are being happened around public education and education in various countries and communities. So there's lots of topics we could bring in as well. And what I'm really trying to get at here is that whatever topic we might think Jupiter opposite Pluto can apply to, we know that there's tension here. And because the opposition is from the sign of Leo to Aquarius, some of the tension is between leaders and figureheads, as represented by the sign of Leo, and between the population, between the collective, between the larger collaborative community, as represented by Aquarius. And so this full moon, because it activates that Jupiter opposite Pluto aspect, it really feels like it highlights or maybe intensifies or brings forward the underlying discord or dissatisfaction or disagreement, if you like. Now that sounds really tricky or difficult. Often we need to bring a disagreement into its full, and we need to bring it into the light so that we can negotiate our way through it. And so that is where this full moon conjunct that Jupiter-Pluto opposite aspect might actually bring us to a bit of a catalyst or to a little bit of a pivot point where at least there is some maybe shared agreement or understanding about the kinds of things we want to work together to address. It's why I sort of describe this particular full moon as having a connection to collective collaboration. Once we get past the tension and the discord, it's like, well, what are we going to do about this? And who do we work together with to make these changes? And so this full moon conjunct Pluto with the opposition from Jupiter, it feels like a really potent moment that will intensify collective passion for a shared problem. So there's a lot going on there, so much going on there. So if we're thinking about the full moon, we've talked about the influence of Pluto on the full moon. We've talked about the impact of Jupiter coming in from the opposition. We can't ignore the ruler of the full moon, which of course is Saturn, currently in the sign of Aries. And so the ruler of this very dramatic full moon is Saturn, who we know has these longer timelines as his priority, and Saturn technically in the sign of its fall in Aries. So I do think this full moon is very much shining a light on where structures and supports have fallen down, where they have come apart, where they are no longer serving their purpose, or where life and the way the world works has advanced beyond the environment in which the systems and structures were set up. So the full moon in Aquarius conjunct Pluto is already saying there's some deeply entrenched issues here that we're going to need to pull apart, reconfigure and find a new way forward with. And the ruler Saturn doesn't have anything stabilizing to offer. The ruler Saturn is actually in its own process of disintegration, or the idea of like coming down to ground. And so the combination of the two is really potent for helping us realize what's not working and what are we going to do about it. Now, we've been talking a little bit about this from the collective point of view, and I do think this full moon really can help spark, collective collaboration or movements. But I also want us to think about this at a personal level, because I know many of you will be working with your own charts, and I know I think about this too. I think about, well, what is this likely to strike or stir up in my personal chart? So of course, you're going to want to think about the topics of the Aquarius house in your chart, or the topics of the Leo house in your chart, and how there is a negotiation going on between the Leo part of your chart in life and the Aquarius part of your chart in life. But keep in mind that Saturn's perspective from his place in Aries, that longer running, almost 2-year transit until around April of 2028 of Saturn in Aries, that is helping you understand a dynamic, a structure, a routine, or a responsibility that isn't working the way that you thought. And so even though Saturn in Aries points to some instability, or maybe not being able to honor obligations and commitments or duties in the way you have so far, that's a clue that we need the restructuring. We need to simplify. We want to maybe consolidate, and we might be putting a bit of a pause on some of our super long-term goals. Saturn in Aries is like, we need to patch up the foundations here before we build anything more. And so I think this full moon at a personal level does give you some insight into something that isn't working well, a pattern, a commitment, a priority that you're like, I just can't keep up with this. And then there's lots of thought-provoking, maybe research or conversations or even negotiations about how can we do this differently so this burden is better managed, or this task or duty is better cared for. And so Saturn in Aries is really helping point out where we've got some weak spots. It might be cluing us in to a fear or an insecurity. It might be helping us realize we're setting an unrealistic standard or a too high bar for ourselves. And if we normalize or bring that back into the realm of reality, we might find we're able to find a more sustainable, workable solution. So these are things we want to keep in mind. Full moon in Aquarius, conjunct Pluto, ruled by Saturn. What this full moon is not, is it's not this kind of joyful celebration of, all the things that are good in our lives. And so there is a little bit of this effortful undertone, given that this full moon is ruled by Saturn. And so there may be a particular problem or challenge that is going to require some extra time, extra energy, or extra effort for you to kind of get it back into a more stable situation. And that can come to light under this full moon in Aquarius. The two main areas in your chart or life that I might suggest you explore this around will be the Aquarius part of your chart and life, and perhaps the Aries part of your chart and life. They're two areas that are kind of pulled in to this full moon itself. Now, I can imagine some of you have been hearing me talk a little bit about this Jupiter-Pluto opposition that is really drawn forward under this full moon. And you might be thinking, how can I work with that a little bit in my own chart? And so I have a few tips for you. So at a personal level, this sort of super potent combination of the full moon with the Jupiter-Pluto aspect. The first way to look at this, of course, as we mentioned, is to look at the houses of Leo and Aquarius in your chart, and to really kind of think about, how do I want to reshape the power dynamics or even my own sense of ethics and integrity about these areas of life, about the topics and the people and the things that you're doing to do with the Leo house and the Aquarius house in your chart. There might also be areas of your life where you're actually wanting to dig into some of those wealth and money themes to explore, are things as equitable as they could be? Is there fairness here? Is there some unfairness going on here? So just digging into those Jupiter-Pluto themes and applying them to the topics of the Leo and Aquarius part of your chart and life. That's the kind of most accessible starting place. If you want to take it to another level, the slightly more advanced version is to pull in the topics of your houses that have Sagittarius and Pisces on the cusp. They are additional areas of your chart and life where the effects of Jupiter opposite Pluto can be felt. So the topics of the houses where you have Sagittarius and Pisces on the cusp, they can be areas where you're also ready to make some of these substantial changes based on emerging ideas about freedom and purpose. And that's because Jupiter is the ruler or the manager of the Sag and Pisces part of your chart, and Jupiter is in this negotiation with Pluto. And part of this process around the topics of life to do with the Sagittarius and Pisces houses for you might involve redefining what it means to be wealthy, or getting clear on the trade-offs that you're willing to make to have more control over your own life. And so there's lots of thought-provoking questions that Jupiter opposite Pluto can raise, even at a personal level. What is freedom to me? What am I willing to give up to have freedom? What role does money or wealth or financial stability play in this, if any? And how do I stay in line with my own sense of integrity or my own sense of values and priorities as part of these changes that you might be contemplating to do with Jupiter opposite Pluto, but really in terms of this full moon in Aquarius that is bringing so much of what has maybe been stirring inside you. It's bringing it into the conscious light where you can have clarity and understanding, and you can get a little bit more of a sense of, if all of this is swirling around inside me, that adds up to going in this direction and not that direction. In this scenario, it looks like this choice and not that choice, because that's ultimately what we want to get you to, is how does understanding these astrological insights help you in your life, day to day, week to week, with small decisions and major decisions. And certainly this full moon in Aquarius conjunct Pluto, ruled by that kind of wobbly Saturn in Aries, this is highlighting some major adjustments, maybe a temporary contraction or consolidation that is required for you before you can go to the next level of expansion and growth. So, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. If you want to let me know how this full moon in Aquarius conjunct Pluto is stirring your chart and life, I'd love to hear. Let me know in the comments below. And if you are a senior astrology student or a new astrology practitioner and you would like to spend some time in a small group setting with me to get some mentoring to help you in your astrology business, I hope you'll consider joining group astrology mentoring starting in August. More details for that over at kellysastrology.com. All right, team, that's it from me for today. Until next time, take care.